It's a beautiful Saturday evening and welcome to Africa Speaks live on Pan-African television. I am your host Rashida Abubakar. Tonight, we follow stories that reminds us that Africa's future would be shaped by the choices nations make in pursuit of peace, justice, and unity, from diplomacy in the Sahel to questions of justice in South Africa, from Sudan humanitarian crisis to the legacy of revolutionary movements. We ask what these movements means to the ordinary Africans. Stay tuned, there's a lot more. Let's begin with our spotlight segment with Daniel Otu Asante, who would be talking about the vital diplomatic breakthrough in North Africa. After a year of tension, Algeria and Mali have restored diplomatic ties. We will see why that is significant now.
Significant diplomatic breakthrough. Algeria and Mali have agreed to restore full diplomatic ties, reopening their airspace and returning their ambassadors. The move ends a rift that began in 2025 following the downing of a Malian military drone near the shared border. Algeria had long played a key role in mediating between Mali and Tuareg separatists and played a key role in an agreement signed between them. This agreement became increasingly unsustainable, and the Tuareg separatists have been actively working with the Islamist militant groups against the Malian army, which is fighting back against these groups. The renewed engagement comes at a critical time. Mali continues to battle armed insurgency in its northern regions, while Algeria faces growing security concerns along its southern border. Both countries now recognize that dialogue and cooperation offer a stronger path to regional stability than prolonged diplomatic isolation. From a Pan-African perspective, the restoration of relations is a welcome development. Africa's security and development challenges cannot be solved through division or external interventions. They require unity, sovereign cooperation, and African-led solutions. The Sahel has long been a theater for foreign military involvement and geopolitical competitions. This was reversed in recent years after military coup in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and the formation of the Alliance of Sahel States. These countries threw out French forces and are building their own security infrastructure. This has demonstrated that lasting peace must be built through regional solidarity, not dependence on external powers. This re-establishment of ties reflects a growing understanding that neighboring states share common interests in defeating terrorism, protecting their people, and advancing economic development. The challenge is now to translate diplomatic goodwill into tangible progress.
Our second story would be from South Africa, where the Constitutional Court has taken a decision that will help migrants seeking asylum. It is a bold stand against xenophobia. Let's hear from Daniel what's happening in these countries.
Now, in detail, South Africa's Constitutional Court delivered a landmark judgment, striking down sections of the Refugee Act that automatically barred people from seeking asylum if they failed to apply within 5 days of entering their country. The court ruled that such restrictions violate the Constitution by denying vulnerable people access to justice and the right to seek protection. The provision in question, which were introduced in 2020, force refugees to provide a valid reason for the delay if they don't apply for asylum within 5 days of entering their country. The decision on acceptance, what the valid reason was, lay entirely on officials. This led to thousands losing the chance to apply for asylum and being deported. The court found that this prevented asylum seekers from getting proper hearing. Equally important was another observation from the court about the government's defense of these provisions. The Department of Home Affairs made claims about involvement of Afghans and Bangladesh nationals in trafficking rings as a way of defending their provision. The court was very critical of this narrative and said it could be seen as xenophobic or racial charged. The verdict comes at a very important time. South Africa has seen several agitations against immigration, especially from other African countries who have been working in their country. Migrants from countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe have been forced to live in South Africa in large numbers. Those that remain live in fear. While the campaign goes on, the government has failed to take any meaningful action. Only the left and some civil society organizations have stood up in an organized way against the xenophobia. The Constitutional Court's decision is a recognition of the fact that the refugees and immigrants are human beings with rights. It is a reminder to the state that migration across Africa is often driven by conflicts, inequality, underdevelopment, and economic exploitation, and that migrants should not be treated as second-class citizens. For all of us, it is a call to resist policies that criminalizes the displaced. It poses a question: can we build migration policies rooted in solidarity rather than exclusion? As millions continue to move in search of safety and opportunities, lasting solutions will require not only human asylum systems, but also economic justice, regional cooperation, and development that places people before profit. And that brings us to the end of this edition of Spotlight on Africa Speaks. Join us next time as we continue to examine the issues shaping Africa's future through informed analysis and commitment to justice, unity, and the aspiration of the African people.
And now to our Expert Speaks segment, where we go deep into the issues on the minds of Africa. Tonight, we turn to Sudan, which faces one of the worst humanitarian crises. For 3 years, the war has caused tens of thousands of deaths and millions of displacement. We asked our guests to examine the political realities behind the conflict and what must be done to place the lives of the ordinary Sudanese above the power of struggle. A very good evening to you and welcome to Expert Speaks Live right here on Pan-African Television. Today, we would be discussing a very important topic, that is the Sudan humanitarian crisis. And to help me analyze the issue at hand is Comrade Mahmoud Salih. Comrade, thank you very much and welcome to Expert Speaks. First of all, let's begin with the humanitarian crisis facing the city of El Obeid. What is the current situation on the ground?
Thank you very much, Comrade Rashida, for having me. The situation is a real catastrophe in Al-Ubaid especially, but the whole of Kordofan and Darfur. If we talk about the siege of Al-Ubaid that started some months ago, it is similar to what happened in Al-Fashar last year when the city was seized under siege by the RSF. It is repeating itself in Al-Ubaid today. The only difference is that the siege of Al-Fashar continued for 18 months, and the world was watching it. It was happening on the watch of everybody, and there was no any concrete action being taken by the international or regional institutions, at least to protect the lives of the people. It is happening today the same way in Al-Ubaid. But the difference is that now the world is more talking about Al-Ubaid, saying, people are saying, we cannot allow the repetition of the situation of Al-Fashar to happen in Al-Ubaid. But, however, these are still statements. As it has been the situation in a past siege, people don't see acts, at least to let them at least to think that this time the international community will have a unified position regarding the prevention of the siege of Al-Ubaid, because it would be a real catastrophe when we have more than 1 million people inside the Kuwait. They are under siege. They are prevented to receive any humanitarian services, medicine, food. There's no water. There is always arbitrary shelling from outside the city. People are not allowed to go even outside the city. So this is the situation in general that is happening in Kuwait, and we don't see acts, but only statements. A statement cannot stop bullets.
What about the recent situation in the Darfur region? We know that it underwent a horrific attack by the RSF. What about that? What about the situation in the Darfur region?
The Darfur region has already been destroyed since the eruption of the situation of 2003, when at that time it was the SAF, that is the Sudan armed forces, joining forces with the Janjaweed militia that are called today, that has been transformed into RSF, Rapid Support Force. They were responsible. They were responsible for the destructions of more than 15,000 villages. They forcibly caused the flee of more than 3 million people, fleeing their homes when there were helicopter gunship attacks on the villages and ground attacks by the Janjaweed at that time. More than 3 million people left their homes and turned to become IDPs around the 5 capital cities of the states of the Darfur region. All of them are today the same. They cannot go back to their homes because there's no stability. As such, most of the Darfur region is under the control of the RSF, except the Jabal Marra area that is under the control of Abdullah ibn rebel force there in the center state of Darfur. The rest of the region is under the control of the RSF, and people are suffering from ethnic cleansing, from genocide that is still continuing, horrible crimes, including rape of women and girls. Girls are 7 years old have been targeted and attacked, and there is sexual slavery when women and girls are confined in areas to be always under this sexual abuses by the RSF forces. Again, the most important area of concern is that despite these horrible crimes, there is no accountability. All this is happening in the absence of the absence of law, accountability. Most of the perpetrators who are responsible for these crimes are still beyond the reach of justice. Even Omar al-Bashir and the rest of his members of his regime who have been identified by the ICC are still at large. They are beyond the reach of justice. Only one of them, Ali Kosheb, voluntarily surrendered himself, and he was tried last year by the ICC. But the others who have been identified and facing arrest warrants are still beyond the reach of justice. Absence of justice is encouraging impunity that is happening on large scale because perpetrators are confident that they are are allowed to go with their crimes. That is the situation on the ground. On the other hand, there is also prohibition and prohibition of the access of humanitarian services by both sides. That is SAF and the RSF, but mainly the RSF, who is impeding the access of the humanitarian services. No education, even students last year or this year who were going to sit for exams from outside the territory of the area of the RSF, some of them have been arrested, some of them perished in the detention centers, some of them are still there and incommunicado detention because parents and their relatives, communities or lawyers are not allowed to meet with them. That is in general that is happening in that.
Comrade, well, there have been reports of the new truance proposal, which the US is meditating. Do you think this would help bring a genuine end to the war between the generals?
Yes, that truce is been proposed, yes, by the Quad. We have this Quad that is composed of 4 member states: USA, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and Egypt. That's what we call them Quad. They made a statement that they are calling for a truce for 3 months. And it has been a long time since that has been stated, but it's never been implemented. On the other hand, this truce is not aimed at ending the war itself, because ending the war needs other, other means and proposals to address the root causes of the Sudan and Darfur crisis. But the truce is meant to at least allow stopping the war and the siege of the cities like Al Ubaid, for example, right now, to allow the two belligerents sit together, agree on how they can create a space for the Sudanese to discuss transformation towards democracy, that to allow the people of Sudan to design a policy that can be effectively helping the transition towards democracy. That we mean towards a civilian-led authority. It is just like that. But stopping the war as such in Sudan needs a lot of efforts, a lot of thoughts, but the truth in itself is positive. If it is implemented today, it can save lives, at least in a way.
According to the Sudanese Communist Party, what needs to be done in order to bring an end to the war and to ensure justice for the people of Sudan?
Sudanese Communist Party has its own initiative regarding the content of your question, that at least there should be a kind of truce to stop, even if temporarily, this ongoing war. Number two, Sudanese Communist Party is calling all Sudanese to join their forces and positions to say no to the war. And that is very important, and not to align themselves with neither belligerent parties. That is. But two, again, Sudanese Communist Party is also calling for the implementation of justice and accountability, because the absence of the rule of law allowed the occurrence of horrible crimes like genocide, ethnic killings, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Sudanese Communist Party is very much with the idea of the implementation of accountability. at least to stop expansion of the occurrence of these horrible crimes. Again, the Sudanese Communist Party is also of the opinion that pending UN Security Council resolutions regarding the situation in Sudan, like the protection of the civilians, opening the corridors for the access of humanitarian relief, is responsibility of the international and our regional institutions like the UN, African Union, and the African, yes, the IGAD. All of these are responsible for the protection of the lives of the people of Sudan. There are a lot of resolutions that have been taken, but not at all implemented into actions. That is our demand, that the UN Security Council resolutions and the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, also all these resolutions should be implemented, and they can positively address the situation, humanitarian situation in Sudan. The Communist Party also is of the opinion that the external intervention from particular countries using the port of Sudan, like the Emirates, like other neighboring countries also benefiting from the smuggling gold, other minerals should stop. It's hopeful that last week we have heard from the European Parliament that yes, they are sanctioning, they already sanctioned some individuals who are affiliated to the RSF and SAF, but today they are talking about non-cooperation, that is financially and commercially, with the Emirates, that is the African Union, the European Union. The same, the G7 also made a statement. USA also made a statement in this regard. And I think if this collective, I think separate initiatives are to be joined and can positively at least stop the ongoing war, because gold that is smuggled is usually used to fuel the war in Sudan, especially in Darfur. That gold comes mainly from Darfur area, but other parts of the Sudan, the north, the east, the center. All this gold is going mainly to the Gulf states, especially the Emirates. And that should be stopped. That is the Communist Party position, that this should be encouraged. This newly made initiatives from the international community should be encouraged to be implemented in a way, in a meaningful way, that can affect the situation positively in Sudan. Again, the Sudanese Communist Party is also of the opinion that the UN Security Council has been always facing challenges by the two permanent members, that is China and Russia, who usually used to impede any proposal coming from from Europe or from the USA, even if it is benefiting the people of Sudan. So the idea is that it is the African institutions like the African Union who can take the lead in front of the UN Security Council, at least to avoid the problem that Russia is always saying, Russia and China, that is coming from Europe or from the US. If it comes from Africa, entities like IGAD, like members of IGAD, members of the African Union, I think that might make some difference regarding the adoption of meaningful resolutions from the UN Security Council.
Comrade, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Expert Speaks, and hopefully the war in Sudan comes to an end and justice is served for the people. Thank you very much for joining us once again.
Very much, Comrade Rashida. Thank you, all of you, for giving me this opportunity. Let's continue this work.
Yeah.
Let us not forget about Sudan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You are still watching Africa Speaks on Pan-African Television. Now, time for our dispatches. We begin with the 2026 Football World Cup, which concluded recently. Spain won the tournament, beating Argentina 1-0. What were the highlights and the lows? We go to Nicolas, who has been talking to us about the tournament.
Happy to be here and continue our discussion in regard to the World Cup, which was very interesting. The Africa's 2026 World Cup campaign was good and should be viewed as a tournament of progress and less of a failure, because while no African national team or country was able to reach the semi-finals, the continent achieved several historic milestones. That the expansion to 48 teams allowed many African teams to be represented, at least 10, and 9 of them progressed beyond the group stage, which is quite an achievement for the continent in itself. Morocco once again carried the continent hopes farthest. They did well in the last tournament. They did the same this year, reaching the quarterfinals before losing to France. While Egypt also reached the round of 16, and several other African teams proved highly competitive against the traditional football powers. So I think this was great progress, but a lot also needs to be done. There's a lot to reflect in terms of structure, infrastructure for the African teams in the continent. We saw most of our teams being able to match some of these big teams technically and even physically, but there was a struggle with game management in decisive moments. You remember on the last episode when we spoke, losing at the last minute for many African teams, that happens. There was that pattern. Some defensive problems also that were very costly, especially towards the end of the game. And also, we have seen a lack of squad depth in terms of deep squad to maintain the intensity throughout the tournament of such a caliber. So the overall picture is that, however mixed, the tournament to the continent has demonstrated that we possess greater depth than ever before. I think we are getting better. I think we are getting stronger, which is important compared to other past tournaments. So there's a lot of potential going forward for the continent to learn from what has transpired during this tournament. Of course, we had issues when the tournament started. And this is because I know the tournament was being hosted in the United States, and we saw geopolitics take the center stage, where United States and President Donald Trump used their power really to bully other countries, to harass and to frustrate countries like Iran, Qatar, not Qatar, Iraq, but also some of our African teams that also face the challenge. We saw a lot of visa politics, where a lot of fans from the continent were not able to attend to some of these matches in these countries because of the immigration rules by the United States, even some of the players. And so also there was the controversy that will remain a large part for this tournament. Two controversies for me. One is the denial of visa for the African referee from Somali, who was the best CAF referee in the continent. Then he could go to the tournament to referee, yet despite being very qualified because of those politics. The other one is when we saw the United States President Donald Trump saying that he personally contacted FIFA to reverse a red card for United States striker, which was controversial, never heard, never seen in such a huge tournament. So those were two things that were very controversial that stood out for me. But as I said, the positive that as African fans we should take out of this, that we should perhaps remember some of the lessons, is that it's good when you have a record number of African teams qualifying and advancing beyond the group stage. And one of the best perhaps teams from the African continent was the Cape Verde. Unmanageable. Nobody expected they would have reached the kind of to the level they did. Not losing against big teams for a small country was such a was something, and including Egypt, Ghana, Congo, and South Africa showed that we can compete confidently against established football powers. However, we need to work on some of the weakness that also the tournament has displayed. But a great future and potential for the African teams for these major tournaments going forward. In regard to Argentina, Argentina played well in some of the matches. Of course, they reached the final and were defeated by Spain. The issue that there was is some of the refereeing decisions that most people believe could have been of great consequences to Argentina reaching the final had they been taken serious. So FIFA has a challenge, and in terms not only of refereeing but also on how they handle the tournament generally. Of course, other issue with Argentina is about its fan base. It's about a complicated history with Africans or black people, but which some view racist. Also, as a team that generally doesn't have majority or any Africa or black player, and sometimes it triggers debates, of course, within the continent and around the globe on how that came to be. And so people go again to look at history, what has transpired, and that generates emotions to some of the things that how people are reacting towards Argentina within the continent, but also in the larger global south.
Our second segment would be about Niger, where 3 years ago, a military coup backed by the People's Organization overthrew the French-backed government. In the 3 years since, Niger expelled French forces and is working with other countries to build an alternative regional structure. We would be finding out the latest from Niger.
Vous savez, 3 années, c'est très peu pour faire un bilan, mais il y a des moments forts que l'on peut identifier. Le premier moment fort, c'est l'affirmation de notre souveraineté avec la dénonciation des accords de coopération qui étaient des accords injustes, léonins, et qui ne permettaient pas au Niger de tirer profit de cette coopération. Alors, nous avons dénoncé cette coopération avec la France, ce qui nous a amené à demander le départ des bases militaires étrangères chez nous. Ainsi donc, les bases militaires françaises et puis américaines qui n'avaient aucune raison de rester au Niger ont été demandées, ont été dégagées. Dans la même logique, Nous avons dénoncé les accords de coopération qui nous lient dans le domaine sécuritaire avec l'Union européenne, à travers notamment la formation en matière de police et de sécurité, et Cap Sahel. Et nous avons demandé évidemment à ces troupes-là de rentrer chez elles. Donc, il y a une affirmation de notre souveraineté. Et dans la même logique, donc, il fallait faire une offensive pour montrer que notre mouvement, notre résolution n'est pas dirigée en particulier contre les États africains, mais plutôt c'est pour le réveil du continent africain, pour le salut du continent africain que ces actions sont en train d'être faites. Le deuxième moment, c'est la revue de nos accords de coopération économique. Ainsi, par exemple, nous avons renégocié les accords qui nous lient avec la Chine dans le domaine pétrolier, ce qui s'est traduit par des engagements à corriger les déséquilibres constatés dans nos relations et qui vont se traduire par une nigérisation accélérée des postes. Dans le même sens, nous avons pris une participation importante dans le chemin de fer, dans le pipeline qui exporte le brut à l'extérieur via ça. Alors, nous avons été amenés à nationaliser l'uranium. Donc ça, c'est une avancée. Nous avons entrepris dans le domaine du développement des projets d'irrigation dans les différentes régions du pays pour accroître la production agricole et rechercher l'autosuffisance alimentaire. Voilà, dans le domaine sécuritaire, puisque nous avons demandé aux forces étrangères d'être hors de chez nous, nous avons fait l'apprentissage de la gestion de notre propre armée, ce qui nous a amené donc à équiper les forces armées, le premier aspect. Mais le deuxième aspect, c'est l'avancée, c'est la mutualisation de nos efforts de défense commune avec le Burkina et le Mali. Ainsi, nos troupes ne demandaient plus, comme ça se faisait avant, l'autorisation de rentrer jusqu'à 5 à 10 kilomètres pour poursuivre les terroristes. Maintenant, le travail se fait en commun, c'est-à-dire on attaque en commun. Quand il y avait eu l'attaque à Kidal, les forces armées nigériennes étaient mobilisées. Le Niger a mobilisé des moyens aériens pour venir en appui au Mali. De la même façon, dès qu'il y a un problème dans un pays, les autres aussi se sentent concernés. Cela a abouti à la création d'une force unifiée de l'AES de 5000 hommes dans le siège, le commandement opérationnel est à Niamey. Et donc, cette force-là aura vocation à renforcer notre engagement sur le terrain et à coordonner et les renseignements et les moyens pour que nous puissions être plus efficaces. Donc, il y a des avancées de ce point de vue-là. Du point de vue diplomatique, il y a une diversification de nos relations avec l'extérieur. Par le passé, nous étions cantonnés avec l'Union européenne, mais de plus en plus, nous avons des accords avec la Fédération de Russie, nous avons intensifié nos rapports avec la Chine, nous avons développé des rapports tous azimuts avec la Turquie, avec l'Iran, avec beaucoup de pays avec lesquels on n'avait pas de relations jusque-là. Donc, je pense que c'est des avancées. Maintenant, il faut asseoir le socle de cette souveraineté. Parce que une chose est d'affirmer une souveraineté, Une autre est de construire les bases qui vont permettre à la souveraineté d'être effective. Donc, c'est le second aspect de notre le défi qui se pose à nous. Mais du point de vue des avancées, il y a une visibilité du Niger. C'est-à-dire qu'aujourd'hui, le Niger, comme le Burkina, comme le Mali, ne fait plus de partie des pays où un beau matin, Macron peut se lever et nous convoquer à Paris. Ça, c'est fini, ça. Même en rêve, il n'est pas possible aujourd'hui de dire à Niamey, venez à Paris, on veut vous dire quelque chose. Ce n'est pas faisable. On ne peut pas nous donner des instructions. Nous décidons de ce qui nous plaît, de ce que nous allons faire en toute responsabilité. Je pense que ça, c'est une grande avancée. Et dans la mentalité, la mentalité populaire, les Nigériens, dans leur écrasante majorité, sont aujourd'hui convaincus qu'il nous faut aller vers notre indépendance. Et ils soutiennent le processus de libération de notre pays. Donc, je pense que ça, c'est une avancée du point de vue de la mentalité populaire. Et du point de vue des actions, il y a des efforts pour affirmer que désormais, les choses vont être différentes dans nos rapports avec l'extérieur. Bon, il faut dire que euh, toutes les avancées que j'ai signalées tantôt se comprendraient pas si on ne prenait pas en considération l'importance des mouvements sociaux, des mouvements populaires qui ont assuré que le Niger ne pliera pas face aux mesures iniques, injustes et illégales de la CEDEAO, et que le Niger ne pliera pas, ne cédera pas face aux menaces d'intervention armée. Donc, il y a eu des manifestations dans tout le pays. Les organisations populaires ont été très, très actives en prenant symboliquement l'escadrille, c'est-à-dire la base aérienne de Niamey qui est logée à l'aéroport. Donc, en prenant la place de l'escadrille et en organisant des manifestations de manière continue pour dire que le peuple est décidé à défendre sa souveraineté. Et un peu partout dans la ville, des manifestations se sont faites. Et si on a pu faire reculer euh, les puissances impérialistes, c'est précisément à cause de de cette mobilisation populaire, évidemment conjuguée avec le soutien indéfectible des États du Burkina et du Mali, qui ont décidé de soutenir euh, de soutenir et de défendre le Niger contre toute agression extérieure. Maintenant, compte tenu de tous ces contextes-là, même au niveau africain, on a vu que au Nigeria, il y avait des manifestations des sénateurs contre l'attaque au Niger. Et donc, toutes ces mobilisations ont concouru à rendre impossible le projet français d'attaque au Niger. Donc, les organisations populaires ont joué un rôle extrêmement important au départ, un rôle de mobilisation et de défense. Et à chaque fois qu'il est question d'intervention au Niger, on voit spontanément des organisations de la société civile sortir, manifester, prendre position dans les rues et essayer de faire de la mobilisation. Donc ça, c'est un des rôles importants. Maintenant, par la suite, une fois que on a fait reculer la France sur ses projets, il y a maintenant sur la question de la défense des initiatives que prennent les populations pour se défendre, c'est-à-dire pour former des brigades de surveillance dans les villages. Et récemment, le gouvernement a décidé d'accompagner cette initiative en décidant de la création de ces brigades de veille qui sont une sorte de trait d'union entre le gouvernement et la population, les forces de défense et de sécurité et la population dans le cadre de la défense du territoire. Donc, dans toutes les zones où il y a de l'insécurité, de plus en plus, on voit des brigades se mettre en place qui sont des relais qui informent les forces de défense et de sécurité et qui sont le premier niveau de la défense au niveau du village. Là, c'est une initiative qui se fait en ce moment. Une partie des organisations populaires s'est retrouvée dans les structures de gestion de la transition, notamment le conseil consultatif de la refondation. Et donc, ça fait que il n'y a plus cette visibilité de certains acteurs comme par le passé. Mais il reste que il y a encore des organisations qui font de la sensibilisation, qui font des conférences, des débats, qui sont organisés régulièrement pour discuter de l'avenir, pour dire que on a fait une première étape. Maintenant, qu'est-ce qui reste à franchir et quels sont les défis? Comment les relever? Donc, ce débat-là est en train d'être entretenu par certaines structures des mouvements populaires. Et je pense que c'est un moment important. Sinon, pour le reste, le peuple se mobilise chaque fois. Lorsque, par exemple, le président du CNSP a fait une tournée dans le pays, il a vu l'importance de la mobilisation populaire. C'était inédit. Il n'a jamais vu une telle mobilisation. Ce qui veut dire que tout ce qui est d'assurer notre souveraineté, le peuple est mobilisé pour réaliser cela. Maintenant, euh, cette mobilisation, évidemment, elle dépend des circonstances, c'est-à-dire de l'actualité. Est-ce qu'il y a un moment où il y a une pression qui est exercée sur les autorités ou pas? En fonction de cela, évidemment, on voit une mobilisation importante. Voilà un peu ce qu'on peut dire sur le mouvement. Le grand moment a été au lendemain du coup d'État, lorsqu'il y avait un projet d'attaque de l'aéroport de Niamey. La mobilisation a été maximale. Et puis par la suite, maintenant, c'est des mouvements euh, de sensibilisation, de mobilisation de population. Et puis dans les zones où il y a de l'insécurité, il y a des brigades qui se mettent en place spontanément, c'est-à-dire les gens se procurent des armes et commencent à surveiller le village. Et c'est le premier rempart avant l'arrivée des forces de défense et de sécurité. Bon, le Niger fait partie de l'Alliance et s'efforce tant bien que mal de jouer sa partition. Ce qui est remarquable, c'est que lorsque les terroristes ont cherché à asphyxier le Mali en s'attaquant aux véhicules qui transportent le carburant, le Niger s'est mobilisé. L'État du Niger a mobilisé des véhicules avec le carburant nigérien pour ravitailler le Mali. Ça, c'est des opérations qui est symbolique pour montrer l'importance de notre solidarité. Et il y a même un projet d'une deuxième raffinerie pas loin de Niamey qui devait servir essentiellement à ravitailler le Mali et le Burkina en carburant. Donc, ça veut dire que nous anticipons sur l'intégration parce que l'intégration doit aller dans la résolution commune de nos problèmes. Et en attendant que les structures productives soient mises en place, les structures soient mises en place pour l'intégration, le Niger prend quand même quelques avances en disant, oui, nous sommes déterminés. Ce qui appartient au Niger on le met à la disposition des deux autres pays et nous espérons que ce qu'il y a dans les deux autres pays vont être pour les autres. Ça veut dire qu'il y a une avancée vers une intégration approfondie dans nos États. Le deuxième aspect, il y a l'effort qui a été fait pour que un rapprochement avec des pays voisins. Par exemple, le Niger a pris position pour dénoncer l'Algérie dans son conflit avec le Mali, et ça n'a pas empêché à ce que le Niger recherche les voies alternatives pour qu'il y ait un effort de rapprochement entre les deux. Et lors de la visite de l'État du Niger, du chef d'État du Niger, du président nigérien à Alger, qu'aujourd'hui, il y a au moins un contact qui se fait entre les autorités maliennes et les autorités algériennes. Donc, on peut dire que le Niger aura contribué dans une certaine façon à ce rapprochement. Voilà un peu du point de vue des alternatives. Mais comme je l'ai dit au départ, ça, ce n'est que l'aspect premier. Le défi est important. Rien que sur l'aspect sécuritaire, les moyens déployés par les Français sont considérables. C'est-à-dire que, pour vous donner un exemple, à Niamey, le Niger qui produit du pétrole, le litre d'essence coûte 500 francs. Eh bien, les terroristes l'achètent à 5000 francs. Où est-ce qu'ils trouvent cet argent-là? C'est la France qui donne des CFA. Et comme c'est la France qui produit les francs CFA, il suffit de produire des billets et ça se traduit par les massacres au niveau de nos populations. Donc, ça pose un défi énorme. Il faut absolument que l'AES ait sa propre monnaie pour que le CFA n'ait plus cours et que ce bout de papier ne soit pas mis à la disposition des terroristes pour continuer à saper les efforts que nous déployons. Donc, voilà un premier défi. Le deuxième défi, il est le défi aussi d'intégration. Il nous faut, on a déjà prévu une banque d'investissement, il faut financer des projets en commun, il faut développer une politique commune d'industrialisation, il faut se partager des tâches, c'est-à-dire il faut une division du travail entre les trois pays pour qu'on sache qui doit produire quoi, puisque la dépendance dans laquelle nous étions est renforcée du fait que nous produisons les mêmes choses et nous vendons les mêmes choses à l'extérieur. Aujourd'hui, il faut mettre fin à ça et puis décider de produire pour notre propre peuple, mais en fonction des avantages, des préférences de certains. On ne va plus produire la même chose pour chercher à produire, à sortir à l'extérieur. On va aller dans le sens d'une industrialisation de nos pays et donc d'une spécialisation de chacun des trois pays pour que la complémentarité soit observable dans un moyen terme. Donc, on a des défis énormes qui sont devant nous, face auxquels il va falloir encore plus de résolution, plus de détermination. Et tout à l'heure, je parlais des mouvements sociaux au Niger. Une des attentes les plus fortes des mouvements sociaux au Niger, c'est la justice sociale. C'est-à-dire que ce que les Nigériens attendent pour encore montrer leur détermination et leur engagement, c'est que tous ceux qui ont pillé les ressources du Niger, tous ceux qui ont mis les ressources du Niger à la disposition de l'extérieur, doivent être traduits devant les tribunaux. Ils doivent rendre gorge, et ça, c'est une exigence forte des populations, des mouvements populaires nigériens. Et jusqu'à présent, à chacune de leurs interventions, ce qui ressort, c'est cela. Une fois qu'on va dans cette direction, on va encore renforcer la combativité des populations et je suis sûr que dans un moyen et long terme, ce qui a commencé au Sahel va détendre dans tout le continent parce que ça correspond au vent du changement, ça correspond au sens de l'histoire. Les peuples en ont assez du néocolonialisme, de la division, de l'arriération, de la pauvreté. Les peuples veulent jouir de leur propre richesse, veulent être eux-mêmes, veulent assurer leur dignité. Et je pense que c'est ça qui correspond au sens de l'histoire. Et c'est dans ce sens que les trois pays de l'AES s'inscrivent avec toutes les difficultés et tous les défis possibles. Mais, comme je dis, ces défis-là, il faut les affronter. Il faut un débat. Il faut débattre pour pouvoir trouver la meilleure formule qui puisse permettre d'affronter avec succès ces difficultés.
And finally, last week we saw a historic conference in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Delegates across the continent gathered for the Hands of Asia, a conference focused on sovereignty and solidarity. What do these terms mean to Asia and for us in Africa? Let's find out more.
So we just wrapped up 3 days of this conference here in Colombo, Sri Lanka, under the banner of Hands Off Asia, a call for people's sovereignty and solidarity. And why we gathered here was because we understood that Asia right now is at the center of attack of US imperialism. Whether it's on the military fronts, we look at West Asia, Iran, and Palestine, to the encirclement of China militarily. But we're also saying hands off Asia on economic, political, and ideological fronts. So this was the reason for having this conference here, bringing together over 70 delegates from around our region. We had 3 days of very interesting panels and lively discussions where we were talking about questions, for example, in South Asia. We have seen a series of basically regime change that the US has imposed or backed from progressive or left governments. We're trying to understand questions of what is this Gen Z phenomenon? What is this youth from a class perspective? What are the economic situations behind the youth going on the streets? We're also looking at, of course, the militarization. We had people coming from Okinawa, from the Philippines, from Taiwan, which are the hotspots of US military aggressions in East and Southeast Asia. We also talked about charting a path forward, of course. How do we actually build people's solidarity to confront the challenges that US imperialism has imposed on our peoples? So I think it was a very hopeful note that we ended on Hands Off Asia, not just as a denunciation of US imperialism, because ultimately we want to build unity across our vast region. And it's something that's very hard, as US has as many fangs on these different fronts that we've already mentioned. So we brought together people from 15 countries of Asia to create a Colombo Declaration, which is basically charting this path forward. How can we build our economic sovereignty? How can we build our political sovereignty, our ideological and cultural sovereignty together as a region, not divided and conquered as US imperialism will have it? So it's now the work is ahead for all of our people's movements. We had political parties, trade unions, women's organizations, peasant organizations here together to think about Hands Off Asia as a solidarity project moving forward. Absolutely, because we're seeing, of course, US imperialism not only attacking our region, right? As we have seen in Latin America, we've seen many of our comrades or brothers and sisters in Cuba, for example, being strangled by US imperialism, the tightening of the grip of the economic blockade, now increased to the fuel blockade, etc. Of course, Venezuela has had its sovereignty completely attacked with its President Maduro and first combatant Celia Flores kidnapped at the beginning of this year. So we are seeing an escalation of military and economic coercion of US imperialism in this stage of what we've been calling hyper-imperialism. It's lost its economic hegemony because of the growing forces of the global south, particularly here in Asia, and it's increasingly compensating it by using its military and economic coercion. So we really need to come together. It's not just about the Asian peoples, it's about the peoples of the global South. Without this, we don't have a fighting chance against US imperialism. I think the path forward, and I think this is at the banner of the International People's Assembly, so of course this is part of a broader agenda that we at the International People's Assembly have been trying to create a political platform over the last 10 years, bring together hundreds of people's organizations on a common agenda, not just to challenge imperialism, but to chart a path forward with a socialist horizon. So we're in the trenches across, Latin America, Asia, Africa, the Arab Maghreb region, but also in the global north in solidarity with the struggles of the peoples of the global south.
And now to our word of the day segment. Today's word is humanitarian crisis. A humanitarian crisis happens when conflicts, disaster, and instability happens in a country. But what is the politics behind it? We will see that behind every political conflict are the ordinary people whose greatest struggle is simple: to survive.
Hello everyone, I am Fauzia Zela Seidu and welcome to another edition of Word of the Day on Africa Speaks. Today's word is humanitarian crisis. You have heard it on the news. A humanitarian crisis is unfolding. We hear it after wars, floods, famines, or mass displacement. But have you ever stopped to ask, what exactly is a humanitarian crisis and why does it keep happening, especially in parts of Africa and the global south? Simply put, a humanitarian crisis is a situation where large numbers of people can no longer meet basic survival needs, lacking food, clean water, shelter, healthcare, or safety. But these crises are not just tragic accidents or unavoidable acts of nature. When we look beneath the surface, we see they are the direct result of a global capitalist system that consistently puts corporate profits over human lives. Capitalism thrives on exploitation, resource control, and unequal power. We see this violent system at play globally. In Palestine, the horrific genocide of the Palestinian people is not a random conflict, but a systematic erasure backed by imperialist interests in a highly profitable military-industrial complex. In Cuba, a devastating humanitarian crisis has been intentionally manufactured, not by internal failure, but by decades of brutal US-led inhumane sanctions designed to starve its people into submission. This same predatory design actively ravages the African continent. In Sudan, a catastrophic war fueled by external capitalist powers competing for mineral wealth has triggered the world's largest displacement and hunger crisis. Across Africa, the ongoing struggles against HIV and recurring Ebola outbreaks in the DRC are artificially worsened because global pharmaceutical giants protect their patents and profits. Capitalist trade agreements deliberately price life-saving treatments and vaccines out of reach, ensuring quality healthcare remains inaccessible to the majority of our people. Even when natural disaster strikes, capitalism dictates who survives. When an earthquake hits Venezuela, or when climate change causes severe flooding here in Ghana, the destruction is amplified. Centuries of colonial plunder and modern capitalist exploitations have stripped our nations of the wealth needed to build resilient infrastructure. In the case of Venezuela, unilateral conceived measures have frozen more than 30 billion in Venezuelan public assets that could have otherwise strengthened disaster preparedness, modernized infrastructure, and finance emergency reserves. Understanding the phrase humanitarian crisis reminds us that charity and emergency aids are merely temporal band-aids. Food parcels, medicines, and tents save lives today, but they do not fix a broken system. Lasting solutions require us to dismantle the capitalist structures that create this crisis in the first place. So the next time you hear the word humanitarian crisis, don't think only of emergency relief. Think about the global systems of power, the fight for resource control, and the urgent need for a fairer world where human dignity comes before profits. I am Fauzia Zola Seidu, and humanitarian crisis have been the word of the day. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep seeing the world in a different view and dimension. See you same time next week.
Lastly, we shift our focus to history. Tonight, we recall the 26th July rebellion in Cuba. Led by Fidel Castro, it became a symbol of resistance against dictatorship and foreign influence. It laid the grounds for victory of the Cuban Revolution and inspired and helped liberation and anti-colonial movements across parts of Africa and the global south. Let's hear why 26 July is a historic date for all of us.
On 26 July 1953, before dawn, around 135 young Cubans dressed in army uniforms drove up to the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba and attempted to seize the garrison. Their leader was a 26-year-old lawyer named Fidel Castro. The attack failed within hours, but it lit the fuse of a revolution. Cuba then belonged in all but name to others. Fulgencio Batista had seized power the year before in a coup the US went on to support. The sugar economy answered to foreign capital. The wealth flowed north while Cubans went hungry. Moncada was a strike at that whole order, and it was crushed. More of the attackers were murdered after capture than died in the fighting. Fidel, his brother Raul, and the revolutionaries Haile Santa Maria and Malba Hernandez were put on trial. There, Fidel turned the courtroom into a platform, and his defense became a manifesto: land reform, workers' rights, schools, hospitals, sovereignty. History will absolve me, he told the judges. Released under amnesty, the survivors regrouped as the 26th of July movement. They sailed back from Mexico aboard the Grama in 1956 and took to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. On the first day of 1959, Batista fled. The revolution had won. A small island in the shadow of the United States had toppled a dictatorship Washington had armed. But Cuba did not stop there and refused to be told what kind of country to become. Cuba began building socialism under blockade, 90 miles from the empire. And it did not keep that example to itself. For the colonized world, and above all for Africa, Cuba was not just a symbol of liberation, but an active fighter. That was clearest in Angola in 1975 as the country won independence. Apartheid South Africa, armed and encouraged by the US, invaded. The CIA was funding the rebel groups UNITA and FNLA. Cuba answered with Operation Carlota, sending its soldiers across the Atlantic to stand with the young Angolan government. At Quito Carnival in 1988, Cuban and Angolan forces halted the apartheid army. This defeat opened the road to Namibia's freedom. Nearly 500,000 Cubans served in Angola over 16 years. Thousands never returned, and Cuba took nothing back. No land, no minerals, no bases. As Nelson Mandela said, the Cubans came never as colonizers. Today, Cubans mark 26 July as the day of the national rebellion. They mark it as a US blockade chokes the island's fuel, medicine, and food. Still, Cuba defends what its revolution built: free healthcare, free education, doctors sent to the poorest corners of the earth. For Pan-Africanists, July 26th is not just history lesson, but an unfinished struggle. The question Moncada asked in 1953 is the one Africa asks now. Who controls the land, the labor, and the future?
And this is where we draw the curtains on this week's Africa Speaks. From diplomacy and justice to conflict, sports and history, tonight's stories reminds us that Africa's future depends on unity, accountability, and the courage to confront difficult questions. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep believing in the power of informed voices. Because Africa must speak, Africa must be heard. I am Rashida Abubakar. Enjoy the rest of our programs.